Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's TRIG meeting, which is our Truck Regulation Implementation Group meeting. This is our second meeting this is our second session in a series of meetings focused on the rule provisions of the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation. The purpose of our meetings, of our TRIG meetings, is to help the affected parties with understanding and implementing the regulation as it's written, as well as allowing affected parties to provide us feedback on how we can better assist in the process as well. And when I say we, I mean the California Air Resources Board, or CARB. So welcome this morning, everyone. I appreciate everyone taking time out of your day to be a part of this group. We have our panelists online. All the panelists have the ability to participate and provide feedback, as well as the meeting is open to the general public who are also listening in as well. My name is Gerald Berumen. I manage the On-Road Compliance and Reporting Assistance section at the California Air Resources Board, and I'm helping with the implementation of the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation. I'm going to be turning it over to my teammate, Jimmy Steele, to get us started on this meeting. Take it away, Jimmy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jimmy Steele, and I'm staff helping out to implement the ACF regulation. So today's meeting is focusing on the ZEV purchase exemption. Just for a brief overview of it, the ZEV purchase exemption addresses situations where a fleet owner cannot comply with the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation due to circumstances beyond their control if a required ZEV is not available to purchase in the same configuration as a vehicle needing to be replaced prior to the next compliance deadline. So about a week before the meeting, co-chair Bradley Northrop emailed links to the meeting agenda and a meeting handout with an ask to panelists to conduct some pre-meeting research. Wendy, can you drop the links to those in the chat, please?
Already done.
All right, cool. For participants listening in, these materials can be found on the ACF meetings and events page. In the Rule Provisions Work Group handout, there are links to the ZEV purchase exemption FAQ and links to the regulation with the relevant ZEV purchase exemption sections listed in the handout. So the purpose of this meeting is to solicit your feedback on the ZEV purchase exemption process and the documentation that is needed to apply for the exemption. We will also go over a draft list of available ZEV chassis and complete vehicles, and we welcome any feedback that you can provide. Earlier this month, we hosted a joint TRIG meeting with the Rule Provisions Work Group and the Infrastructure Work Group. I would also like to point out that the ACF team hosts monthly Q&A sessions. The dates for these meetings can be found on the ACF Meetings and Events webpage. We also have recordings of the meetings posted if you missed any of the Q&A sessions or the TRIG meetings. I would like to pass it over to Bradley to kick off the meeting.
Thank you, Jimmy. And welcome everybody, and thank you for everybody that was able to make this meeting. We did have some initial feedback regarding notice. We've taken that to heart. I'm going to be doing a little bit better job here of direct outreach to the panelists, to the TRIG group, so it's a little bit more personal and not the ZEV fleet meeting reminder that we tend to get a lot more than just this one group coming across our radars. So apologies for that, but we're going to be moving forward with emails, prep, and a little bit more communication from the co-chairs to be able to get this on everybody's schedule. We do also understand it is spring break week for a lot of people, so if you weren't able to attend, we apologize, but this meeting is going to be recorded, and we'll be talking about topics for the next meetings at the end of this meeting, as well as some regular cadence and confirming length of the meetings and such. So the first discussion that we have on the books today is really to talk about that zero emission vehicle purchase exemption. What we're really trying to focus on today is information from you all, from everybody here on the call, of what we can expect to get from fleets regarding information for those bids, what we would be able to reasonably expect to provide to CARB in response to say, hey, these vehicles aren't available. You know, specification sheets of vehicles, what are the mandatory things that we would be able to provide that CARB would then be able to identify and clearly review for vehicles being not available. And then purchase orders in meeting the criteria to apply for exemptions. So that's the first area. I think Jerry and Jimmy, you had a little bit of a sheet to go through in discussion before we move into the next topic.
Correct. Yeah. So let me get that queued up here while we're talking. But so I'm going to share my screen that has the handout that was sent out. But just to clarify a little bit, Bradley, what we're talking about on the, so the required documentation's already in the written into the regulation. So that's why we asked everyone to take a look at that prior to the meeting, and we included the relevant links to that part of the regulation, as well as the fact sheet. So I'm sharing my screen now. That shows everyone what was in the handout. So as we can see here, we have in the zero emissions vehicle ZEP purchase exemption section is where you can find that information. But so we want to make it clear that the required documentation is already in the regulation, but we're hoping to get some feedback, like you were saying, Bradley. Is there documentation you're already receiving, or that you get from, when you're putting in bids, or when you're including purchase orders, that already includes some of the information that's in that required documentation? Or, so we just wanted to open up that discussion. So, we did want to go through it a little bit, saying that there's, reporting is the regulation requires reporting. Again, there's the enforcement notice that we have there. So we have it linked there. So we are taking that into account. But the regulation as written does require reporting, and we have the reporting deadlines there. So once the waiver is granted, when exemptions are coming in, the fleets would be reported already in the truck regulation upload compliance and reporting system. So so that information would already be available. But yeah, so I just wanted to kind of clear that up. And here's the handout that we provided, and it provides the process for requesting the ZEP purchase exemption, Bradley. So I'll kick it back to you to get the discussion started.
Yeah. So, and apologies for that. I wasn't trying to confuse things, but so as Jerry mentioned, we already know the information that needs to be included. But what would help is CARB understanding what in our standard processes, what in the industry, what in the acquisition of vehicles are already included in these things, right? And if there's a purchase order copy that includes a lot of this information, is that helpful? So we'll kick it open to open discussion just for a few minutes before we move on to the next item. Is there any immediate comment, content, questions, feedback that we can get from the group?
If I may, one thing that has come up with some of our customers, particularly as they're talking about planning into the future, as we look at 2027, let's say, particularly when we're looking at work trucks, the concern is the exemption timeline being, if I'm interpreting this correctly, being 1 year prior to when that takes place. That's a very tight timeline from a standpoint of trying to get trucks ordered, budgeted, and then actually, into service and so on. So the question that's come up is, how do they navigate that for getting the exemptions in that? If I'm looking at this right, they wouldn't put their exemption until 2026 to say that they need an exemption for certain types of work vehicles. And that timeline, and talking with them as we go through that, is extremely difficult to meet when the supply chain for chassis is, is so extended, and then obviously buildups and so on and so on.
We actually had a lead up question to that, I think, prior to the meeting that Jimmy had a good clarification on. Jimmy, is that still in relation to the timeline itself for filing? There was a comment about at a certain point in time when you can file during the period. Am I correct?
Sorry, had troubles with mute. Yeah, we asked that the application is submitted as written in the regulation 1 year prior to the compliance deadline, and asked that it's submitted within at least up to 2 years. So within a 1 to 2 year time frame is what we asked to appropriately assess the ZEV market.
Right. So Rick, it's not. Is that still? I know there's concern about lead times, right? But that's the regulation is written as it is, and so we're not going to change the times. We're not going to change the requirements. But what is it that would then be able to be provided in that sense, right? If it's a tight timeline and there's still questions on documents that can be provided in that timeline, what is it that can be provided reasonably from the industry? This is a year in advance. Is it just a general estimate? What can we provide? I mean, you guys are the experts with building vehicles at a year and ahead of the time. It seems like there might be some assumptions being made at a certain point, but then what is it that's reasonable to expect at that point?
Yeah, and I guess that's where they're looking at saying, I guess their concern is saying, okay, at what point and how long is that going to take as they go in and say, okay, we don't believe there is a reasonable alternative on the for a ZEV to meet these requirements as we go through. But I guess if we do stretch that into 2 years, and then they're trying to obviously make it coincide with their especially the IOUs with their 3-year rate cases and presenting what they expect their costs will be going forward. They're concerned about how long once we go into that process. I know there's a timeline written there as far as getting that answer back, so that they may so that they can actually proceed and be able to rely on that decision, if you will, and be able to move forward with purchases and such, and be able to make those those additions to their fleet.
Is there anything that and so I think we all hear the same concern, right? We all have that same question mark in our heads as fleets and as industry persons. What if any is the limitation in being able to submit that information in that timeline? What information can't be provided within that period of time, so that there's a clear expectation with, if it's a year in advance, but there's no definition on what chassis would be coming available. What does that mean? I guess that's my thought here for that question, because we still have the 1 year timeline, and we still need to be able to submit something prior to the 1 year. And if it's not already part of a published list as exempted, what is it that can be provided a year ahead of that, and reasonably so, right?
And just to clarify, Bradley, we're talking about time, the application time. We're not talking about when the vehicle is actually delivered time, because so as long as the application is made, I'm sorry, as long as the order, I'm sorry, as long as the purchase order is made, we're talking about purchase orders for vehicles, not delivery of vehicles. So as long as the purchase orders are made in a timely fashion, then the delivery of the vehicle isn't the issue. It's the purchase that's being made and the paperwork, and the documentation that goes along with that. But it also depends on the compliance option as well. So I just want to make sure that we're talking, we're talking the same language here that it's, yeah, we're talking about the purchase orders themselves, you know, it's not the delivery of the vehicles. So just wanted to clarify that a little bit.
Well, and thanks for clarifying, because I was confused maybe with Rick's comment, because, well, the context I believe Rick's question was in relation to was the timeline for us to request an exemption, right? And that's
Correct. Yeah.
right. The request
Yes.
of the exemption has to happen prior, and you're not going to issue a purchase order prior to receiving or applying for an exemption. So I think purchase orders isn't necessarily the timeline we're talking about here. It was when we're filing for the exemption, what's the reasonable expectation a year ahead of when a purchase order would be issued?
Okay. And I
right.
see I jumped on there.
Am I correct in that assumption, Rick?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Rick, is there anything, I mean, from the industry side, what's the information that could be provided a year ahead?
Well, you know, and we're just coming back from, you know, various, a couple trade shows, and then we've got the other one coming up, and speaking with various manufacturers, and that's where, particularly, you know, for the IOUs and some of their applications, you know, we have not really identified a methodology to put ZEVs in place and be able to work in the duty cycles that they're requiring for really stationary applications. And their concern is how do we get these exemptions filed for and put in place, and can we do that? You know, if I'm understanding the comment that I believe was made with the clarification that was sent over, that in essence we could file that 2 years in advance, so as to have a little more runway there, if you will, to be able to say, okay, this is what we see as far as what's technologically available today, and how and what the work that's being done and the equipment that is being driven and so on, and here we have a little more runway to be able to make that happen, and get that exemption, and then start the process of purchase orders and obviously, you know, procuring chassis and equipment and so on. So I just those are the bigger questions. Now this is it falls into, if we're looking at the really the milestone group, and looking at the group 2, you know, more on that work truck section. So that's really that's where they're, you know, focusing some of their you know, their attention on now, because that's their next critical timeline that they're concerned with coming up. So originally, as we were talking about it, saying, well, 26 is pretty tight to then make that 27 and start putting compliance units in place. But with if we can, let's say, start that in 25, that should be, I think, enough time to make that all come together and put alternatives, assuming that, you know, all those the applications are in and they can be reviewed and decided upon in a reasonable timeline.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but the ZEV milestone option, the work trucks don't have a replacement date until 2027 at the earliest, right?
That's correct. Only
Yeah,
10% of the work trucks in the fleet would need to be transitioned to zero by 27. So that does mean that if you are applying for a ZEV purchase exemption for, well, I guess if you're using the milestones option, you would have to be applying for exemptions for all remaining combustion vehicles in the fleet. But if you had a deadline that's based on the 10% January 1, 27, the reg does say that the latest you can submit the application is 1 year ahead. So you would be able to submit it earlier than 1 year ahead. I believe depending on the compliance option selected, could be up to 2 years ahead of a deadline. But we did build that in specifically so that way fleets would have time to go about the process, you know, find out whether or not manufacturers can serve the needed ZEV, and then have time to actually gather that manufacturer denial letters and submit them to us at least a year ahead of their deadline.
And Chris, can you confirm the timeline for response in the regulation? So once somebody's submitted the exemption
Once they've
request,
submitted a complete application, not just any request, but a complete application, then we would have 45 days to reply.
Okay, so that's a good context here, right, guys? That if you've got something in a 2027 compliance pathway for compliance B, right, for milestone, and starting January 1st, 2027, you've got up to 2 years prior to that to submit requests with a 45-day response period. So everybody's clear on that. Okay.
Bradley, I just want to remind everyone that we only have 2 hours for this meeting, and the focus. I know it's super important, and I'm not trying to say it's not, but the focus. We want to get feedback on how we can work together on getting the right documentation. We have a system in place to provide compliance assistance with all this stuff, with all these questions. If you want, you can email zevfleet@arb.ca.gov. More than happy to walk through that process, through the compliance assistance process. Like Jimmy mentioned, we've had, this is our second TRIG meeting this month. We've had 2 Q&A sessions. There's lots of vehicles available for compliance assistance, but we want to make sure that we're targeting what we need to get from this particular meeting here, which is the feedback on the documentation. So I just want to remind everyone that we do have a short amount of time to get this done today.
Thank you, Gerald. Yeah, and we'll try and keep it on topic here as best as we can. Again, we're trying to help as much as we can. There's still lots of questions, so we're working through it. Okay. Next hand up we have was Sarah.
Hi, yes, Sarah Delorier, and I hope you can't hear this tree removal behind me, but
We're good. You're
you're
coming
good.
in
Oh,
loud and clear.
wow.
Don't hear it at all.
Amazing. Okay, I'm with the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, just for those to know, and that's representing the public wastewater side of things, municipalities. And so I guess about the documentation, we don't have as many questions that are raising at the documentation yet. I am pulling that together. There are some questions that have come together. As public entities, we have to do a lot of tracking of documents just from a investment standpoint and responsibly investing public funds. And so there's been quite a bit of work in that area and tracking what kind of investments need to be made over time. And so that's something I'm definitely going to be bringing more information on, following up with folks as they're going through the exemption process. I would mention that there's a lot of heartache around and issues around the years or 13 years of age vehicle, because we do have a lot of vehicles at 8 to 10 years that need to be replaced, but there's not a functional equivalent ZEV. And so going about managing through that issue is something we really need to coordinate with folks a bit more on, that 13 years of age, not being able to be eligible for exemptions or this exemption or others until that is reached. So something that we're working on, also building documentation around to show that there's some significant need around to address that issue. And I don't know or expect if there's any kind of feedback on that, if there's any discussion that maybe when reopening this just to address AB 1594, that would maybe be also addressed.
Let's try and keep it away from any pending revisions, just because those have a completely different process and honestly a much different timeline than these TRIG meetings do to be able to provide some feedback. If there is anything though, Sarah, regarding to the public procurement process, right, and the way that you develop your documents and the responses that you get, what do you expect to be able to provide in an exemption application? For example, let me just pull, you have a new wastewater Vector truck or sewer wastewater truck that needs to be purchased in the next year, and you received a zero responses regarding a zero emission chassis availability. What does that look like? Are there terms inside of the bid that you're expecting to be able to use, or are there items within that procurement that help to identify if there is or is not a ZEV available for public response? Is it specified in a certain way to allow for a zero emission chassis? Those types of things, I think that help with us understanding and CARB understanding what we can reasonably expect to be able to submit with those applications.
Sure. And is that something you want me to speak to now or just bring back in terms of?
If you have, I think, open discussion here, this is exactly what we
Sure.
need. Yeah.
Yeah, so in public procurement or procurement processes, we do try to specify as much as possible what as terms of functionally we need in a vehicle. So say it's a sewer truck or combo or vac truck or such. You want to specify as much as possible what the actual functions will be needed, and then understand or help those different folks who are going to be bidding that they can actually be responsive to that and meet the needs of the agency. And sometimes those vehicles need to be provided, say it's under a mutual aid agreement or other, understanding the frequency at which they'll be used and such, the power takeoffs that may be needed from some of these vehicles, all of that information, they try to specify as much as possible to get the appropriate response. And then, of course, there's a whole process on the agency side within their commission in terms of approval of
Right.
purchasing any vehicle that takes some time. And so as far as maybe some feedback on that, we might want to try to tell you what the range of timeline is for even just getting approval for purchases for these different vehicles, whether they're just kind of typical fleet vehicles that have some daily operations or some more vehicles that require some specialty type of operations. I'm getting distracted by this tree removal behind me, so I'm sorry about that. But
No,
I
that-
certainly would be happy to provide a summary of this information so that maybe it could be useful or be used by you guys to understand. This is the type of information we expect, and this is the kind of documentation that's needed to support that.
That would be great. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think you're not in the only boat there. We're all trying to figure that out as well. And thank you for that, because that's super helpful in us being able to pull together, the realistic expectations, right? So, and something that isn't specifically in the regulation, but it is very useful in planning purposes, both for CARB and for us, is, what's that estimated actual lead time, not just for building something, but actually buying it. Everybody's got different processes, high priority, and then state and local, completely different, and drayage as well. So yeah, perfect. Okay.
Bradley,
yeah,
can I jump in super
Yeah.
quick? Since Sarah brought it up, I just want to flag for everyone that there is a workshop on the amendments to ACF from AB 1594 on Monday at 9 a.m. That's on the meetings and events page that Wente linked earlier.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so whatever you can provide, and then also to the group, right? That it helps us as a document for us to talk and discuss, maybe contribute additions to, with relation to other conditions or considerations for other industry as well. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I think the next hand up was Nick Blair.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'll try to keep it brief so we can get to the other segment of this. So a common theme that I've been seeing from some of my members is that they are challenged not only in looking at the chassis, but also the drivetrain attached. And in some cases, these are manufacturers that they're seeing that they don't have any experience with. So and so it's resulting in a lot of additional legwork, if you will, to do research on the vehicles available, but not only that, but also the drivetrain. And so I think it's just creating a lot of uncertainty, and there's also concern that there may be over demand for some of the models available, so that I think there's just a lot of angst right now with that. So, and I have other details and input I can give later, but I just figured I would note that for the time being.
Thank you. Yeah, right there with you. Lots of uncertainty. Still working through it. We're baby steps right now. Okay. I think the next hand up was John Constantino, and then we'll go to Christian Corby, and then we'll move on to the next item.
Hey, thanks, Bradley. But I think Christian was first. So.
Oh, okay. Hey, thanks. Thanks for the honesty. Okay, Christian, you're up, buddy.
All right. Thanks, John. So I got a few things that came in from Truckee Donner Public Utility District by way of NCPA, and some of the things that would go towards documentation. I think this is kind of specific, perhaps, to public fleets or fleets that are operating in kind of extraneous geographical conditions, but how trucks perform in high elevation, cold or hot temperatures, hilly terrain, full off-road or four-wheel drive capacity, and then what operating in four-wheel drive capacity does to range or hours of operation. He noted some of the things about the same things go for the PTO or EPTO. What's the hours in the field that it can operate, and then how quickly could it be recharged, and then also multi-day operational requirements. So could a truck operate for multiple days in the field? And then again, also like how fast could it be refueled? So those kinds of things seem to be like pretty important for them. I think one of the other things that I don't know exactly how this fits with documentation, but the reg requires that this fit the vehicle's primary function. So if being out in the field for multi-day trips is something that this truck does, 50% of the time or 40% of the time, not necessarily its primary function. I just don't know exactly if some of these maybe smaller fleets are going to be able to purchase trucks that can't also accomplish these things. So just wanted to raise that with respect to documentation.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. I think that does actually lead into a follow-up question, perhaps for Jimmy or Chris at CARB staff, with relation to any expectation when we submit documentation. There's a defined definition. Is it a qualified type of element, right? So it's suiting the vehicle's originally intended use. What does that mean? And is there going to be, and is there already examples? I believe there are already some examples out there for FIQ, but conditional, maybe even examples of exemptions that have been already filed and evaluated.
So I just wanted to clarify, Bradley, before we jump into that one, that the replacement doesn't have to be an exact replacement. You can focus on the vehicles that can be replaced more easily first, right? So you can meet your compliance requirements by focusing on the vehicles that are available as a ZEV and that can handle so it doesn't have to be an exact replacement for the vehicle. So I just wanted to point that out, that yeah, we understand that there's technologies that are coming that are still under development, but that we don't have to focus on a one for one in that sense, so just a heads up on that one.
And
Yeah,
I can add
I totally agree. We're not trying to go, you got to think about they have to think about their fleet strategically and
right.
trucks that they can first. But I think for some of these smaller fleets, smaller public agencies, they need their trucks to do a lot of functions. So I think they have some concerns around whether or not they can, do that and then still rely on what trucks they have left to do, the thing. So I think it works, but then it also causes consternation in some situations.
And then just keep in mind that there's also different exemptions available as well. There's mileage exemptions that are available, as well as configuration. So it doesn't all have to fall into the ZEV purchase exemption. As we should always keep that in mind. We're talking about the ZEV purchase exemption today, but there are other exemptions that are available to fleets as well.
And I think to that point though, Jerry, the ZEV purchase exemption request does play into what to Christian's point, what is that intended purpose, the original intended purpose of the vehicle, right? There needs to be a little bit of that definition to guide us away from ZEV purchase exemption into a different exemption, right? If it's not qualifying as that applicable chain, where does it direct us to, right? And that kind of a flow chart, perhaps.
So, I mean, we can easily look at the definition of configuration in the regulation. Configuration means the primary intended function for which a complete vehicle is designed, as determined by the body permanently attached to the chassis of an incomplete vehicle. So we're looking for configuration and primary intended function to be tied to the complete vehicle or the body attached to the complete vehicle. So examples of configurations include bucket trucks, box trucks, concrete pump trucks. We're not looking at things like charge times or time out in the field when determining primary intended function or configuration of a vehicle.
Yeah, so primary intended function, it's a box truck. It serves as a box truck, regardless of how you actually use that box truck.
That's correct.
That's cut and dry, right? It's a dump
Yeah.
truck. You use it like a dump truck. Even if you don't use it like a dump truck, it's a dump truck.
Right. And the purpose of the ZEV purchase exemption is to, again, cover situations where a given ZEV is not available in a needed configuration. So not available as a bucket truck doesn't cover situations where it's not available as a bucket truck that has to sit in the field for 5 days and has to be charged on a dime. So
Because that's more of an operational consideration versus the
exactly
function design.
right. And so the regulation does have the daily usage exemption, which kind of acts as a surrogate for most operational concerns, based either on range or demonstrated daily energy used by a vehicle. But beyond that, there's nothing else in the regulation that addresses that.
That's all totally fair, and I that's all totally fair. However, the daily usage exemption is not going to give like smaller fleets, their needed extraneous circumstances. That's just not, I totally agree with you. That is what that's for. But for some of these fleets, that's going to be really hard for them to say, okay, I can't. It's not because it's not a daily usage, right? It's some of these extenuating circumstances that makes it difficult for them to fit it in. So I think it's totally fair to raise the multiple pathways, but if we're going to talk about specific needs for trucks, it's hard to say, it doesn't have to be one-to-one fair, but if it's not going to do some of the things that it needs that they need these trucks to do, it's going to be really hard for them.
And I
Right.
think this is a great segue to say this is one of the hot topics to now put into the next meeting criteria for talking about the daily mileage exemption. What does that mean, and what documentation is needed for that, and what can be reasonably provided. But for today, we're really just talking about that ZEV purchase. So let's pull it back into the purchase and away back from any operational characteristics that would be impacted by a different exemption.
And I do want to tie real fast, Bradley. I do want to just tie that back to kind of the general purpose of why we structured the regulation the way we did. Exemptions were not intended to cover every possible situation that were outside of the control of a fleet owner. We did build considerable flexibility into the regulation to allow fleet owners to kind of target their purchases towards easier to electrify vehicle first, such as with the ZEV purchase schedule. Only half of the trucks that they purchase this year need to be ZEVs. If they're trucky, they may also be, take advantage of the delay till 2027. So they may not actually have to purchase anything for the next few years if they're using the purchase schedule. And under the milestones, of course, we provide additional flexibility to add combustion vehicles as long as you're meeting your milestones. So fleets could, of course, as Jerry mentioned earlier, focus on the easier to electrify segments of their fleet first. Granted, the smaller fleets may have less choices, but they do have some choices. So they can focus on those earlier and then, either just defer purchases till later in the timeline when more infrastructure and better technology will be available. But that is something to consider, that the regulation does already have considerable flexibility built into the basic compliance paths.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, John Constantino, you've been waiting very patiently.
No, it's fine. Thank you. So my question relates to both what Jerry and Chris said about combustion vehicles, and you can sort of pick and choose. So if you head down a path of, I want to replace these 10 vehicles, does your application have to show in some regard that you couldn't replace the other 90 vehicles? I mean, what is in the application to make it complete that says I need these 10 and not, or how do I show that I'm not being clear here, but who says that I couldn't replace something else, and how is that part of the application, and completeness? And what about that timing? If I go get bids from a bunch of people for these 10 types of trucks, and then I come back in time and you guys tell me, no, you can't get an exemption because one of your other trucks could get purchased. I'm just trying to figure out how what
Yeah.
data needs to
So-
be submitted. in
So
an
this
up-
it depends on the compliance path selected. So if you're picking the ZEV
Right.
milestones option, which I think is probably what you're referring
Yep.
to, the regulation does specify that in order to apply for a ZEV purchase exemption, you need to apply and obtain exemptions for all other combustion vehicles in the fleet at the same time. So if you had 100 trucks in the fleet, then you would need to apply for all 100 vehicles to be approved for a ZEV purchase exemption under the milestones path.
Meaning I have to do the diligence to see if somebody could build a specialty box truck, bucket truck with the mileage, with the configuration.
Any combustion vehicle in the fleet.
So I have to do all 100 vehicles before I can get one exemption.
Yes, that is what the regulation specifies.
Okay.
And is that a great question here. Is that reasonable, and can we provide information from the industry or from builders or from chassis suppliers to make that a easier piece to report, right? What can we have the list of vehicles based off of what you have in your fleet? And this is the segue that are all part in truckers. These are the vehicles that are affected, and very quickly we can do an evaluation where there's 100 remaining vehicles that need to have that. So your due diligence is actually less, right? So I'm trying to kind of help out the discussion here of, John, it seems like that's a really insurmountable ask, right? For a milestone option. But if we were to, identify in this group what's reasonable to expect and then give to CARB in that sense, what makes sense at that point?
Yeah, and I was just thinking, if you have if you're a large fleet with very unique vehicles, right? It's easier, or maybe it's harder than if you have 100 bucket trucks, 100 work trucks, 100, digger derricks, right? If you have four of these, it makes, I'm not sure which one's easier to show, especially if you have to have, folks like Rick build you something, right? And your wheelbase and your configuration and whether the ZEV is available and the chassis, and there's just a lot of things to consider, and it seems, as you said, insurmountable. So love to sort of narrow that effort down, I guess.
So is it reasonable to expect, though, to say in truckers, we know which vehicles are in the fleet, the fleet in question, they're complying with the milestone option, they're looking for exemptions, but in order to file for an exemption, they need to identify with certainty from the industry that the rest of those vehicles are not available? What is it that is easily identifiable in our situation as a fleet, sending that information to CARB to say this is not possible? Is it chassis size? Is it drive type? Is it by again the intended purpose and function of the body composition? The vehicles quite literally don't exist. And I do think that this is going to be a little bit more helpful once we establish the ZEV list, and maybe that's a good segue. We can start rolling into that, right? Because that ZEV list really starts to give that configuration of your group your group B, or your group 2 for milestone. Seems like it's 100 vehicles and you have to go and spec and build every one of them. But if very easily you can identify that chassis is not part of that list, then very quickly you've narrowed down your search results, and you maybe only need to do 5 outreach for a configuration for dump trucks or what have you. So I hope that helps. And I think that's I think where we're going to move into the next segue item to talk about. Brett and Michael, I'm going to wait to get to your guys' questions, so please write them down. Don't forget them. We can rehash this a little bit, but we do want to make sure that we move through and get on to the next topic item, which is super important because we want feedback from the information that's being provided here. So hopefully everybody had a chance to review. Maybe Jerry or Jimmy, if we can pull up the document and the published list, we can go through the second item here on the agenda.
Yeah, I'll pull that up. Just a reminder,
I already got it.
it's not a published list, but
Thank
yeah, but it's our draft. And
Sorry, not published,
Yeah.
but for discussion.
Yes, for discussion.
Yeah.
I'll let Dorothy give us an intro on this one while I'm sharing my screen here.
Thanks, Jerry. Actually, I already have it up, so I think we're all set.
Perfect.
So I'm fairly new to the group, so I just want to do a quick introduction. My name's Dorothy Fabiger. I'm on the staff helping to implement ACF. I was at the infrastructure TRIG meeting, but not the first rule provisions TRIG meeting. So I just wanted to say hello to everybody. So I started putting together a list of available zero emission vehicles that are all certified in California. The information for this list that I've put together comes from actually our certification database. So you can actually click through and look at the executive orders for each of these vehicles if you want. But we thought a summary list might be helpful for people. So for example, so the list is set up by class, and then within each class, we have manufacturer, powertrain type, and the models that are available, excuse me, from that manufacturer. So if we look under class 6 here at the top from Battle Motors, they have battery electric vehicles. They have two different models that are available. And then similar throughout, there are some that have multiple powertrain types that are available in the different models. So some of the feedback we're looking for is a list of this type helpful? Is there other information on the executive orders that you would like to see included? Is there other information generally you think would be helpful? What's actually helpful in a list of this type?
All right. Let's go with Brett and Michael. I'm going to call on you guys because you had your hands up, but let's keep it to this topic and then we'll wrap back around for the final on if it was a question on the first item.
Yeah, no worries. I think it's actually a perfect segue to my question. Okay. So it touched on both sides of it. Yeah, immediate feedback is yes, a list is very helpful. I do want to be very cognizant of the fact that not all commercial vehicle manufacturers are created equally. And I know I get to say that from a position of privilege at Daimler Truck as a leading market share company in the segment. Our product validation is unparalleled. That's what has built our business. I see people on those lists already that are conversions that do not go through the same robust engineering processes that we go through. My biggest, gravest concern through a vehicle exemption or the purchase exemption process is if somebody offers a configuration that may be not meet the same standards and serviceability requirements and the ability to provide uptime for our customers, provide spare part availability for our customers. There is no litmus test built into the ZEP certification, and there is no clear understanding of the sanctions if they're unable to meet the criteria of the ZEP certification that I'm seeing tied together. In the worst case scenarios, you force a customer into purchasing an asset because it is the only available asset, and then it is unserviceable in the field and you have a stranded asset and we're unable to achieve our shared climate goals. I don't necessarily need an answer. It's scary to see the whack and hack jobs that we've seen in the industry. I know that the HVIP list does a really good job of keeping that somewhat curtailed, but just because somebody's in a segment does not necessarily mean that vehicle is going to stand the test of time that a commercial vehicle is expected to. I know that seems impassioned, and again, from a position of privilege, being Daimler Truck, I'm just looking out for my customers on this topic.
So Brett, on a bit of a deeper dive into those comments, what is it that Daimler Truck and many automotive manufacturers should be able to easily provide to CARB that help make the decisions for fleets looking at a list like this, right? So on this draft list, we've got the manufacturer and the model type and the availability, but what else in a customer sense needs to be very clearly identifiable to help make decisions. But then additionally is something that can be very easily requested by CARB to manufacturers to say, this is anytime you are going to publish this list, you need to give us the list of vehicles and at least this minimum information. And it's not a big giant lift from the OEMs.
Yeah, Bradley, I think that's a great question. Now, I can speak to it from two sides, but I think the most pragmatic for the purposes of this call is the quantitative piece of it. Service network. would be the first thing I would rely on. The availability of a service network geographically throughout the state of California. Where are those service centers? Count of trained technicians qualified to service that powertrain in that vehicle is another one that comes to mind. To dive a little bit deeper and to get into slightly more qualitative piece of it is, service part availability. I know there's the ZEP certification requirement for powertrain components available within 30 days or no more than 30 days of downtime. So there's qualifiers already built into that. There are easily quantifiable measures in there that I think will provide a customer the safety and security that if they were to purchase this asset that is from a less than traditional OEM, that they will be supported through the lifetime of that product.
Dorothy, can you confirm we're planning on only publishing ZEB certified vehicles onto this list, right? So taking any of the unknowns out of the discussion, if they make this list, they have met the ZEB certification requirements.
Where applicable.
Where applicable. Okay. So I'm going to pull it back and I'm going to go a little deeper there, Brett, on yours, because we have a great comment in the chat from Suzanne. Hopefully everybody's been able to see that. And if not, I'm going to bring it forward here. Some of the abbreviated information to bring together, like what's the gross vehicle weight ratings? What is the cargo body type? What's the payload calculated based on a base configuration, right? For me, I think one of those deciding factors, although it's not part of the decision making, is where's the starting base MSRP? That type of things that where we can talk about, this list becomes useful for fleet managers and fleets and OEMs to be able to see this is what's available out there. What do you think?
Suzanne, thank you for that bullet pointed list. It does kind of segue to another point I wanted to make. Thinking about the Class 6 segment box truck, you throw, there is no ZEV technology right now that I'm aware of that does not add weight to the chassis and the vehicle does not experience a payload penalty. When you put a refrigerated box on it and a lift gate on that vehicle, you've greatly reduced the payload. Now, I understand that the regulation is not intended to define what is the current baseline payload that a Class 6 vehicle in a box configuration can carry, but the weight penalty is very real. And, then you do get into parlaying with the daily use piece of it as well, where can this vehicle actually be utilized in the operations as intended, as its analogous ICE counterpart. And you can talk about battery range and all that, but when you can only put 6,000 pounds in the back of a Class 6, that's significant.
So, Brett, is it reasonable to say that information, that bullet pointed list that Suzanne provided, is easily reportable by manufacturers based off of configuration, body type at a minimum level, right? You're able to say the minimum capacity is going to be this. Our EM2 comes out as an incomplete vehicle. I do not know what is put on the back of that truck. Right. That goes into my next segment.
I cannot state what is the payload capacity with the cargo handling equipment on it. That is not at the purview of the OEM.
I'm gonna call on Rick. Hopefully he can unmute real quick. Just knowing that from the body upfitter perspective. There you are. Hey, so perpetuating this little bit of conversation here, that bullet pointed list, in cooperation with OEMs, is it reasonable to expect that body manufacturers would be able to report on to CARB what the payload capacity expectation may be on a vehicle? And is it something that's can be reasonably expected to be provided and updated onto a list like this, where it becomes a valuable resource for fleets evaluating this list and what's capable of doing the job?
Yeah, and I was actually just going to put something into the chat, because in addition to the good information that Suzanne listed from the upfitter standpoint, the challenge that we're seeing is that particularly the front axle weight ratings are really difficult to work with on the battery electric trucks, because many of the OEMs have not yet been able to upgrade those front axle weight ratings to be able to handle all that weight that's going forward. And then that creates a huge challenge on what you can actually put on the back of the truck as a configuration to really make that work. So some of the information that really is required in addition to all of that is, okay, what are the gross axle weight ratings and what are the actual weights on those front axles as a cab chassis, if you will, so that then we could do some additional calculations for what is the configurations and weights, center of gravities and such for those builds as we go forward.
Not going too technical into the side of things, but if Daimler was to provide, here's the information on our chassis available, what information on this sheet would you need to see to then be able to provide your feedback as a body upfitter to say, these are the reasonably expected payload capacities, without going too far into the detail, right? Obviously, like there's a disclaimer on this and saying
Sure.
this is subject to, but we can build something that has a payload of X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, the Gower is the basic. They already provide that information, but really what is the weight on the on the front and rear axles as a cab chassis? That would be where we go, so we can get a reasonable estimation to say, will this can this comply or not?
Okay.
Hey, I have a question for Brett before. So let's say we get an application from someone who's saying they can't get a ZEV, but we know that Daimler offers that chassis. Who would we contact? Who do we reach out to and contact to talk to about that at Daimler?
I'll happily bird dog anything for you, Gerald.
And when I say we, I'm saying CARB. We're doing our due diligence.
Our compliance and regulatory affairs team would be the first stop. So Sean Waters, our vice president of compliance and regulatory affairs, is I don't want to blow up his inbox by any stretch, but that would be the operating unit that would handle those conversations that have the level of intimacy with all of our vehicle specifications. And we can provide either a group mailbox or a single source contact for you.
Okay, so I'll let Dorothy coordinate with you on that, Brett, because she's working on this. Yeah. So
I'm not looking for a weekend ACF. That is not our desire. We got billions of dollars invested into our ZEV technologies. We want them to proliferate on the road, but we don't want, and I'm just looking around real quick, we don't want the blink chargers in front of a grocery store that are defunct and delinquent for 20 years to be the first experience our customers have with their ZEV platforms that they put out there on the road. And so I just want to be mindful of the ecosystem that it takes to keep these commercial vehicles operation in a high degree of uptime. We monitor our 24-hour throughput at our dealer network, and we're hovering at 85% of trucks that come in are leaving within 24 hours fixed. That's what keeps the American economy rolling.
All right. And it looks like we have a couple more comments in the chat, but I did want to call on
Bradley, before I jump off of that, I just want to remind everyone that we're talking about the ZEV purchase exemption, and the way it's written in the regulation is that we're looking, when we're reviewing the exemption request, that we're the regulations only looking at the configuration. The additional criteria is something separate, and we would have to again look into different avenues for different exemptions or whatever the case might be. But for the ZEV purchase exemption, it's the configuration that it's looking at.
So for example, these extra fields that people are requesting, such as vehicle inertia, axle ratio, payload capacity, we could include those things, or manufacturers could include those things, but we would not be able to consider those as criteria for whether or not we grant a ZEV purchase application.
Right. And I think so we want to make sure that this list itself is a resource, right? That's the whole point of it being provided. And we're talking about it here in the context of what then becomes something that needs to be provided in that list, that is reasonable to expect to have in that list, that becomes useful for fleets in planning purposes. If it's on that list and it sounds like that vehicle's available and that chassis is the configuration that I'm looking for, it's very quick to review that list and say, yeah, I'm not going to be able to do a ZEV purchase exemption. It looks like I'm going to have to do something else, or I'm going to find another alternative for conversion on a lighter duty vehicle to pair my to pair my electrification efforts and planning. So in the context of this list, we do want to make sure that it's a resource for fleets to be able to use to help guide them. We absolutely understand that the exportable power, the range, the max charge rates, all those things are not part of the consideration, but perhaps they could be asterisked in the list itself of this is items that are not inclusive because they're not part of the regulation applicability. You know, that being said, I do want to keep it moving and move forward here. I am going to call on, I believe Michael Lewis had his hand up before from the previous question, and hopefully you have, Michael, do you have something for the list?
Yeah, I guess I'm getting a little confused now the longer this discussion goes on, because if I have a service truck, I'm a construction company, I have a service truck and I've got a welder and a pump and a group and a compressor and all the things that I need on it. I'm right at the maximum limit now, and I have to switch over to an electric vehicle, and I've now got a couple thousand pounds of batteries. I now have to either go to a higher class of vehicle, which means my employees now need a higher class driver's license, and I got to pay them more money because they have that highest class driver's license. What is the consideration? I mean, I got to have a truck that's got to go X number of miles. It's got to be able to stay at that location maybe for a few days. It's got to be able to operate all this equipment. But you're telling me if it's on this list from that I'm not eligible for that I'm not eligible for an exemption because somebody makes something that supposedly meets my needs but doesn't meet my needs at all.
Great call out. I just want to be clear that in that situation, yes, if the vehicle is on that list by configuration, right? It's a utility truck is a utility truck, and it's a list of vehicles on the utility list or on the vehicle list. It is a utility vehicle, so you wouldn't be able to apply for a ZEV purchase exemption. But in your description of payload operationally, you know, being able to work through things, that may qualify for a different exemption. Or alternatively, that's not the targeted vehicle that, and to the point of CARB staff earlier, that's not the targeted vehicle initially for conversion, right? Not until something does become more available would you be targeting that vehicle. So and we all have those vehicles. I'm working through the same thing myself here, City of Carlsbad, trying to figure out, okay, how am I building something that's not too big for the road and can still do the operations that it needs to be? And so I'm targeting different configurations of vehicles to be able to isolate. So I do want to be clear though that we're talking about the ZEV purchase exemption. So and by body configuration, as Chris clarified at the beginning, by body configuration and intended function, a service truck is a service truck in the sense of definition in the regulation. A dump truck is a dump truck by the exemption or exemplary of the regulation. So in that sense, it sounds more like your conditions and most fleets conditions wouldn't meet the requirement at that point if a manufacturer says I can build a service utility body truck that is this size.
Yeah. And I can confirm that the regulation does specify that if a vehicle is available in the next higher weight class, of course, class A being the top,
Right.
that you would be required to purchase it, and the ZEV purchase exemption would not be applicable in that case.
I hope that clarifies it. I know it's not any good news, but I mean that's the point that we're trying to make here is like that operational characteristics aren't necessarily part of this discussion today. But it's absolutely on the list. The daily uses exemption and things to discuss about what information needs to be supplied for those situations, those conditions are absolutely on the list to discuss here. Okay. I think the next person that had their hand up was, and hopefully somebody from CARB can help me start identifying who raises their hand first. I love that Zoom can never actually tell you who raised their hand first.
It actually does, and Matt's the next person with their hand
perfect.
up. If you click on participants, the order that the hands are up on the list is the order they raise their hands in for you.
I learned something new every day. Thank you, Dorothy. Awesome.
Yeah, of course.
No, thanks, Bradley. My question, well, I guess first off a statement more for Gerald. CARB recently reached out in regards to contact people for ACF within our organization, and I'm sure other manufacturers are getting the same request. So we're putting together a group email and be able to provide that. That way customers have a resource to reach out to the OE or manufacturer based on zero emission vehicles and what's available and what might fit, and then with the dealer network and so forth. So it seems like that's already in place, and we'll be able to provide that information. In regards to the list, Dorothy, that you're pulling, how often, if you guys are relying on the HD, zero emissions powertrain executive order, how often is that updated? Because the current list that's on there now was at the end of January. There's been a few others that have been issued out, since then that aren't on that list yet.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's certainly, I think it is unrealistic to think it will be a real-time list that is updated daily or anything. I don't think we've figured out exactly how often it will be updated. If forced to guess right now, I would say something like quarterly, probably, but not gonna hold myself or any of you to that right now. But yes, we do get executive orders frequently, and so we get new vehicles available frequently. So how to keep that list updated is a question that we are wrestling with right now.
Okay. And
sorry, Matt.
No, go ahead. I was just going to ask, when that list is, prior to publish, would there be a outreach to the OE, with Suzanne's list and, some of the other discussions that have been put out there of some of the other items, that go beyond just, the powertrain, when we're talking about maybe the chassis curb weight along with the GVW, that way, at least, what the chassis payload would be. Maybe depending on what the upfit would be, you'll be able to determine, what the overall payload would be, but you'll know what you're working with from basic spec information that's public information.
Yeah, so I think the notion that CARB is going to keep a list up to date with changing manufacturer information is challenging. Here's the thing I've thought about a little is if you, as a Zuzu, maintain a list of that we can link to. So if like where it says Zuzu for manufacturer, somebody can click on that and go through to information about your vehicles. That's the sort of thing we can maintain as long as you guys promise to maintain your website and not kill that link on us at some point. So like a single link out feels realistic. I'm not sure that keeping manufacturer information up to date is going to be possible, but it's something we're looking into.
No, totally understand.
So for Matt and the other manufacturers on this call or other body upfitter companies on this call, is that reasonable to be able to provide a pretty sustained link that CARB would then be able to expect to use on a purchase exemption list like this?
Yeah, I know for us, it wouldn't be a problem, with our, public facing website that has all our vehicle information and then links to our dealer network and service support and many other, items that they can link to.
But there are there are 2,000 upfitters, right? So it's going to be difficult to say that you can link to every one of them, or that the guy that makes the tanker truck is different from the guy that makes the dump truck, who's different from the guy that makes the hundreds of people that make the box trucks. So the complete upfitter piece of it may be more difficult than the dozen chassis makers or whatnot.
Hey, Matt.
Good feedback, John.
I'll add real quick from Daimler's perspective. I agree with Matt at a very high level. It's easily achievable. Right now, there's the market's small. Sold 200,000 trucks last year. You can find the registrations for our ZEPs. When that shifts, the highly configurable nature of our vehicles makes them each one very unique. I could stand in my truck plant all day and not see an identical truck go down the line. So there's a lot of nuance in weights and axles and configurations and wheelbases that will proliferate in the zero emission market, which will make it challenging. So with that said,
and I think that's to Dorothy's point, right? That's not something that CARB could easily or be realistically expected to maintain. And so if from the OE side, you have a chassis weight, class, type, function, that's configured and linked and can be reasonably expected to be maintained on a list like this.
Yeah, and Bradley, all I'm saying is our spec sheets are 18 pages long.
Right. No, I get you.
When somebody goes into a dealership and orders a truck, and every single one of those builds in a calc that kind of at the bottom of the list, it can give some figures, but it's highly configurable. And I think there's a very limited opportunity, if no opportunity, to publish a vehicle configurator. This is not passenger car. This is not selecting between an XLE, an LE, or a limited with how big your screen is and what size, what wheels you want on it. Very different.
I think we're more limiting on the expected content, right? It wouldn't be the every single option ever. It would be what axle sizes are being offered. That, you know, that type of basic vehicle configuration information. I'm
just fast forwarding to 75% volume, 100% volume, and we're going to need a solution for every single truck that exists, every single configuration, and that permutation list is long.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to Nick Blair. You have your hand up?
Yeah, kind of on that topic, and once again, trying to be brief here so we can get to the other segments of this. I had a few members of mine within the public water agency space say that it would be helpful to identify current units deployed and or in service on this list. I think to the previous speaker's point, it gets very complicated when you list out a bunch of different specs, but maybe across the basic classifications, understanding demand for it and what is actually available will be helpful for them, because they have, as has been alluded to, a lot of information before them and not as clear of a timeline on how quickly they can expect to get the finished product. So yeah, basically just piling on with what's been said.
Okay. Any clarification questions from Carb?
No, that's really helpful. I mean, once again, I can't make any promises about everything that we can include in this list, but it's good to know what's actually helpful for you. So yeah, that's super helpful.
All right, on to Suzanne. Suzanne, you've got your hand up. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. We get two thank yous here on my end. I posted my second set of comments in the chat as well, but I just wanted to echo one of Brett's comments about knowing where the manufacturer service centers are located. That information is very, very helpful in knowing where manufacturers have the ability to provide like timely mechanical service throughout the state. I mean, that I want to say is a huge factor in making decisions as far as what upfitters you use for what types of equipment and where you use them throughout the state. Also, knowing if a manufacturer is categorized as a low volume manufacturer is helpful, in addition to understanding the time frame a manufacturer is able to deliver a vehicle, whether it's 6 months, 12 months, something different. And the concept that Dorothy suggested for a link from maybe the CarbSet website going directly to the manufacturer's site might be a very good resource that can be updated on the manufacturer's side to provide that information.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there, okay. I don't have any other hands up. I did have one thought also, and I wanted the feedback from the group here of, in a list like this, in addition to what we've been discussing now, is it helpful to then see what milestone those vehicle configurations would live in? If it was situated, so for someone using a milestone option, that vehicle manufacturer with that body or is available to be upfitted with that type of a body, and manufacturers do have a pretty realistic expectation of what chassis are designed for which purpose. To Brett and to Matt's inquiry here, whether or not that's reasonable to say, you'd be able to say this chassis would be available to be upfitted with X, Y, and Z bodies realistically. Let's get with Matt. Brett first.
Yeah, we rely heavily on our dealer network for that.
Okay.
So the dealer network is the one speccing the vehicle based on the customer's needs. They are the subject matter experts for the specific relationship with the customer. Again, the breadth of customers that we have. Us as an OEM, we've received, it's a partnership between us and our dealer network for what configurations are most appropriate to meet market needs. And again, I'm not looking at this from, just the first milestone. Really want to approach this from as we, achieve the percentages that are, being requested through 2040. That'll be very much so a dealer network conversation as far as what is eligible for it. Now, with the basic information that we can provide regarding the vehicle chassis and their axle ratings and whatnot, most can get there. And I know that there's a very, very strong support and partnership with a lot of our bodybuilders. As it was noted, there's 200 or 2,000 of them. We do not have a direct relationship with all 2,000. So we do rely on the interconnectivity between what the customer use case is, the dealer relationship, and the nuances that are uncovered through that process to navigate that.
Thanks, Brett. Matt?
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with Brett. It really depends between the upfitter, the dealer network, and putting together that solution for the customer, whether they were following work group 1, number 2, or if they were working, work group 3 as a tractor or anything, which we don't play in that market. But, for us, it'd be mainly work group 1 and 2. But then depending on the upfit, does it need the EPTO? What are they going to be is it a utility body? Is it hooking up a crane? Is it using 12-volt system as well as the battery electric high voltage? So there's a lot of specs that have to come together to determine, what that upfit and where it qualifies within that working group.
So it wouldn't be something that an OEM could provide. It would definitely have to be feedback from body manufacturers at that point, that a vehicle is built with a milestone group in expectation.
Correct. Yeah, we're going to provide a cabin chassis, and then the upfit is based upon the customer demands and the availability of what that vehicle can accept.
So
Awesome.
I have a follow-up for Matt, if you don't mind, Bradley, me jumping in. So again, when I want to ask on behalf of CARB, if we do get an application, like say someone from Isuzu saying that they went to an Isuzu dealership, a specific Isuzu dealership, and they couldn't get a ZEV from that dealer. Do all of your dealers offer ZEVs, or is there a certain, that would be important for us to have a list of what, if it's not all the dealers, then what dealers do offer, ZEV vehicles.
Right. All of our dealers are capable of, doing it, but there's certain certifications that they have to meet in order to, from a safety and compliance standpoint, to be able to utilize and sell and service, zero emission vehicles or high voltage battery electric. So that will be published on our public website and our dealer directory of which dealers are certified, which dealers are not, similar to when we work with our Cummins counterparts, who's certified and Cummins who's not. So all that's published in public information that we provide to our customers.
Yeah, see, and that would be important information for CARB to have from all the OEMs, right? Is us to understand what the California network is of ZEV dealerships, as well as the upfitters too. Since we're talking about this, and do all your upfitters have the capability of providing the service?
Right.
Yeah.
And in terms of actually getting in contact with upfitters as well, since part of the regulation does require us to basically solicit this information out to any upfitters to say, hey, can any upfitter put this needed body on the back of this available chassis? I think somebody, Daimler might have mentioned that you don't have direct contacts with all your body upfitters, but that implies you do have direct contacts with some, and that you also mentioned that your dealership network would have more direct contact with body upfitters. Would they be a good resource then to reach out to the dealer networks to get contacts for the body upfitters?
They'd cover a portion of it. There's a lot of our customers that we just sell a straight chassis to, and they work through that. I'll say there's customers of ours that hold their relationships with their body videos very, very, very close, and to the point where it's just that's their business. If it's a highly vocational truck, these are often very custom spec'd equipment being put on the back that is one's different than the other. Our relationship is with a few very large bodybuilders and TEMs that we work with to ensure that as we design our chassis and release our products, that it's going to meet the majority of the market needs. And then the layer down is going to expand like a pyramid to the dealer network, and especially in their region in the vocational needs geographically in their area. And then the widest part of that is going to be at the customer level and the relationships they have with their local temps.
That's helpful. Thank
Brett,
you.
is there, and Brett and Matt, is there a suggestion of possible associations that would be able to provide more information from a body upfitter perspective that you have relationships with, or that might be able to provide better feedback on available configurations?
Just
follow up, Matt. Yeah.
From top of mind, I'm thinking NTEA, with our work truck groups there, to be able to, utilize them as a resource. Most of our body upfitters are members of NTEA, and there's a resource and directory that, could be accessed through that group and association.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. It looks like Will Ryder, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So just a question for chassis OEMs and CARB. Where is there an opportunity to integrate so that maybe inside of a CARB, website, it's great that we have this list of these certified vehicles, these chassis, right? Where is there an opportunity to work with OEMs, chassis OEMs, so that you can show the lead time based on production schedules for these chassis? Because I work in a very specialized, I'm in the armored transport, right? I can upfit, albeit there's only like less than a dozen upfitters in the entire United States that can upfit my vehicles. I need to know, based on the availability of the chassis, when they're going to become available. Then I can work with my upfitters on a production schedule, right? To ensure that I'm going to try to meet these deadlines, right? Year to year to year. So, but I'm looking for like next level integration opportunities. There may be 1,000,001 upfitters out there, but I think what's important is to understand how soon can I get my hands, if I'm able to see this, and based on all of these different chassis that I may be able to upfit to any one of them in that certain class, what's available to me where I can partner up with the upfitter to make those acquisitions. Does that make sense?
Let's not forget we're here to ask CARB questions. Yeah, no, William, you're good. For the most part, it's planning that's going to set you up for success, at least from my OEM perspective. Somebody coming in off the street who is just trying to buy a truck from the dealership is going to be at the back of the order book. Versus the organization that is setting aside, requesting allocations throughout the year based on their business needs and their truck cycle replacement. So the sooner you start that conversation, and now I sound like SCE, the sooner you tell us, what your plan is and how many trucks you need, the sooner we can plan and put those into the build schedule for you.
Yeah, I think, that's great, Brett. I think when I'm in my mind, as I'm looking at the list in the document here, and it shows all these ZEV models, where is there an opportunity for each one to list all of those models and to show a lead time, an updated lead time based on the OEM production of what could be on timeframes of when these chassis will become available? Are they available now? If I place an order today, what's the lead time for that based on the current production capacity of when that particular chassis is going to be available? Because if I have like 50 chassis to prove from, and I have to meet my deadline, then I'm going to go, if the information's parked all in one spot, like on a CARB site page that shows all of that information, to where I can go in and just say, okay, here's who I should be dealing with, the OEM I want to be dealing with, because they're going to be able to get this much quicker than this OEM. Is that based on lead time? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I completely understand what the information you're looking to capture, William. Again, our lead times flex based on incoming orders and production capacity. And that's the consistent across the diesel product today. There's times when the order book is very full and your quarter's out. There's times when it's tighter than that, and it depends on the OEM. The sooner you engage, the sooner we can identify when those build slots would be and allocate accordingly.
So let me
Yeah.
just interject here a little bit, William. I think that lead time specific by model does vary greatly, as to Brett's comment, and that's a little harder for a sheet like this to capture. However, I do think that it would be reasonable for us to be able to publish into the list the model year configurations that are available, and if they're actually being produced or not by OEMs, right? That's something that an OEM would be able to provide feedback to. This is available. Say it's Isuzu, you've got a new cab forward chassis that is in this gross vehicle weight range, and it's going to be available as a model year 25, and it's in production now. Those types of information things are very easily identifiable, and it maybe helps with a little bit of that strategy, William. And if I'm looking for a manufacturer that's actually building this right now, they're going to have more answers than the manufacturer that's proposing that new model year is going to be available in 2026, but they haven't started production yet. They have their exemption, or they already have, their executive order, and they could be on the list, but they don't necessarily actually have production units.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Bradley. And I do just want to say something as dynamic as lead time that may change even week to week, right, from these manufacturers. I think it's not realistic for CARB to be able to maintain that in some kind of real-time database, but that is also something that maybe we can cover with links out to manufacturers. So it will require another click through rather than all being in one list, but that's something that manufacturers will much more realistically be able to maintain than CARB.
Yeah,
so
and
it sounds like
I'm looking for out of box, like API integration, webhooks, stuff like that, right? To me, it's like playing, hey, if I'm going to do this, it's like playing the stock market. What's the stock at today, right now? And maybe I should buy right now versus wait, holding off for 2 weeks, and then the production schedule changes, right? So
that may be something that becomes available on the private sector side, not necessarily a CARB required list or anything. So anyway, okay, so looks like we've got a lot of good conversation, a lot of good examples, a lot of good information and feedback from the OEMs and some body upfitters. We can provide a little bit of this as revisions, right, Dorothy, to the exemption list and what we'd expect to be able to include for another discussion element, continuing this discussion into the next meetings. Before we start talking about next meetings, I wanted to bring it back to our first topic item. And if there was any other follow-up questions that we still had on that item that weren't able to get addressed, I'm just happy we were able to get through both sections and be able to get some feedback from y'all. So bringing it back to the first question relating to information that's already becoming available or during procurement processes in applying for and filing your ZEB purchase exemption applications. What is it that fleets would be able to provide to CARB in part of that, and what's already available? Or do we need to now, I think where we kind of allude to, do we need to have a standard form, that is then built up that says this is the minimum requirements, and this is the guidance document, basically, to say this is what you need in your application? We already kind of have that. It's just a matter of is that sufficient enough in its current form, or is there something that needs to be acceptable, as in a document that's already been provided from a bid response? Got no hands up so far. CARB, any comments to follow up with that, bringing it back to item number 1? No? Okay.
Yeah, I think we're just looking for feedback from the, that's what we're trying to find. We already know what's in the regulation, what's required by the regulation. So we want your feedback. Is there something that you're already getting that maybe provides that information already that we don't know about, because we don't know. CARB doesn't have all the information on what you get in your bid processes and your purchase orders and in, spec sheets, whatever it might be. Is there some documentation? Is there a, we don't even know, is there like a common document that is provided by all, during all, so that's what we're trying to get feedback on. We are, like I said, we already know what's in the regulation, what we're looking for. what boxes we need to check to say, yes, this is a complete application. We just want to know, do you have something that you're already getting that might cover that for us? And then maybe, walk us through that. So
I don't have any immediate hands raised, so it doesn't look like there's too much to add to that comment. Oh, here you go, Rick. Please.
Yeah, I think, it feels like we're kind of at that chicken and the egg thing right now, saying, okay, we know what's in the regulation, and then we want to know what you guys get. As Brett alluded to, these are very specific configurations for each customer. From being able to comply standpoint, what customers and the industry is really looking for is to say, okay, we're looking to really fill a checklist, if you will, and say, these are the items that you want, and this is, and this is what you're looking for. And I think that's where we might be able to work together to say, okay, that's what your regs are, and this is what what we get, and how do we mesh those two? But I think that requires a little bit of work together between CARB and, let's say, maybe some of us on on this panel, to say, here's where they kind of mesh, so that you're not asking for something that we really can't provide you, and we do get this information. This is probably helpful for you, right? So but I think there's a little bit of work that has to happen together to make that happen, because I think we're both kind of looking and going, well, I don't know what you want. Yes, I know what the reg says, and you say, well, the reg says this, but we don't know what you get. So that's kind of feels like where we're at right now.
Exactly. So to hash out what those documents might be, Rick, and what information do they include, and so that it's brought to awareness for everybody in this call of, this is what in the industry you're reasonably expecting to have already done in the development of a vehicle build, right? And what is it that's making it not applicable, right? It wouldn't be possible to build a vehicle that's being configured. Mind you, operational characteristics aside, right? That's
Right.
Operationally, the vehicle would still be functioning as its body type. But perhaps there's a legal requirement where safety NHTSA regulations wouldn't allow a chassis to be built in a certain way. Those types of things, right?
One of the other things, and one of the other people brought that up, is that there are even some union issues that are applicable. And if we do move up in class, and then maybe have to move up in CDL requirements and so on, now you have some union workplace issues that you're trying to tackle as well.
The regulation doesn't pull any of that into the evaluation for ZEV exemption, so that's not something that we would be hashing out or deliberating here as a determination for a vehicle body type configuration and purpose. So it is yes, still concerns, absolutely still concerns operationally with things, but that's ultimately not part of the ZEV purchase exemption. All right, Christian, you've got your hand.
Yeah, and maybe this is a little too granular, and I might be I'm definitely outside of my wheelhouse on this one, but as far as documentation goes, maybe it would be worthwhile for CARB and fleets and OEMs to work together on putting together kind of a generalized process for what a private fleet and a public fleet has to go through in order to purchase a truck, and what documents are issued and then returned, like from the spec sheet to a purchase order, and just trying to figure out what those things typically include. And I mean, granted, like this, I mean, obviously having a discussion about it isn't going to hit all the details, but perhaps getting a kind of a generalized process together on that would be worthwhile, so that we know kind of what CARB is expecting, and the OEMs know what to expect, and a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more spelled out. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, and if there's something that every chassis OEM or body upfitter is expecting to have already provided in doing an evaluation, and showing the due diligence that there's been an effort, right? I think is the biggest part. If there's nobody's, I guess to the point of CARB would rather see that there's evidence of an attempt to make a vehicle work, right? Rather than just copy and pasting something that says it's not there, it's not available, right? I guess that would be the point to make, is there's going to be some level of documentation built during an evaluation phase of a vehicle's configuration and body type that then can be used as documentation for a vehicle not being available, and provides a great resource for CARB when you submit that with your application, and there's contact name and information to the builder at that point of, you know, following up directly. Why is it that that vehicle wouldn't be available?
Yeah, and if we could see copies of, you know, we're not trying to get, you know, private information or anything like that, or confidential information, but if we could see copies of spec sheets and bidding process, you know, and stuff like that, we could then start looking at what you're receiving. That would be helpful as well.
And if there is something that you're willing to share with CARB, but you want not publicly released, we have a process for sharing confidential business information with us.
And in terms of what we're actually looking for too, in terms of what do you need to apply, really you just need kind of three main things. One is just summarized information about the configuration you're replacing. That's information basically about a vehicle that already exists in your fleet that you should be able to pretty easily gather. Two, photographs of that vehicle that's being replaced. And three, the two manufacturer statements that state that a ZEV manufacturer cannot make the vehicle in the needed configuration. And so I think ultimately what you're getting from manufacturers would be, what do those manufacturer statements look like, where they say, no, we can't make what you need, or a dealer statement or an upfitter statement, or, you know, et cetera. And what information does it include on that statement that would be sufficient, you know, to show for the regulations purposes that no, this vehicle is not able to be configured in that needed configuration.
Sorry, Nick, I know you have your hand up, but I gotta jump on that, Chris. Yeah, box truck, whatever, box truck. But we're talking about the minutia of highly configurable vocational trucks, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be thrust into the position of doing engineering studies to see if it can or can't work, what somebody's trying to accomplish with our EM2.
That is what the regulation requires. So if a fleet wants to get an or basically apply for this application, they have to provide information from at least two manufacturers that offer ZEVs in the needed configuration or ZEV chassis.
What if I don't respond?
Then they'll get the exemption. If nobody responds. And then, you know, potentially you would lose a sale if you could make it, or somebody else could make it.
Well, I'm not going to lose the sale if I can make it, but I'm also not going to go through an exercise thousands and thousands of times for every unique configuration. I'm just highlighting. Sorry if that's a, you know.
No, it's a good point, because
comment.
it's good discussion point here, because it does highlight the need of CARB to be able to rely on OEMs and body builders to be able to provide the feedback of what is and is not available. And if somebody's applying for this exemption and there is no responses from an OEM, or there's a confirmation from the OEM saying, I cannot build this, and there's no OEM that can build this, then that vehicle automatically goes, or at least, not automatically, but then that vehicle would go into an exemption list, right? The vehicle is not available or not going to be subject to the reg.
Would there be palatability to expanding the authorization of that to our dealer network?
Yes, absolutely. I think that we would include dealers, you know, authorized dealers, of course, when those letters come in. So, you know, we would want them to, of course, go to a ZEV dealer first. So if you had those that are authorized ZEV dealers and those that aren't, we would expect the fleet to go to the ZEV dealer first for Daimler and say, hey, the dealer says we offer ZEVs, but we cannot configure it in that needed box truck configuration with a crew cab, all-wheel drive, and frame attachments that the regulation specifies. That's pretty much all we need.
Okay.
But yeah, I think we would accept authorized dealership documentation there.
Would you accept the upfitter because they're the final vehicle complete, you know, manufacturer? You know, they're the ones who are going to put the final label on, and they're going to be more apt to be able to determine if that upfit is even capable on that chassis or whatever chassis is out there in the marketplace.
So the regulation kind of broadly uses the term manufacturer. I think that we would have to take it back and see whether or not the definition of manufacturer would include upfitters, I think we would, but I can't again commit to
Like,
that on this call.
I believe you have the bodybuilder in reference in the regulation. The
Yeah,
builder of a configuration body, I think, is roughly referenced. Rick might have it memorized here.
Yeah, it does, you know, from a standpoint, if we are providing the final stage manufacturer label, that I believe that is the wording that's in the reg, and that would apply in that case.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Awesome.
With that said, does that also cover like the availability of the upfitter? Like I remarked before, you know, I'm not going to have any problem obtaining a chassis from an OEM because I can choose from multiple chassis, but there's a limited number of upfitters with a limited production capacity. So if I'm applying for an exemption, can I just apply? Can I send into body upfitters that says, hey, we're so full with orders, we can't produce your order for 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, the regulation actually has a specific consideration for the model year availability. And so we would not consider a vehicle available if it's offered with a model year that's more than 18 months from the date that the complete application was submitted. So for example, if you submitted an application January 1 of 24 and a manufacturer came out and said, or an upfitter said, yeah, we can give you a 2027 model if you order it today, then we would not consider that available and you would be eligible for an exemption in that case.
Okay.
And so the model year does have to be within 18 months of that application. So we can say roughly it's 2 years for calendar year purposes.
Sorry, William, that's in conflict though, Chris. Because if William needs a specific bodybuilder, how different is that than a customer wanting a Freightliner?
It's not necessarily a specific bodybuilder, so it does have to come from a ZEV manufacturer, dealer. The upfitter question is, you know, again,
I'm sure
we would
Brinks
get the
uses
statement.
1 or 2 upfitters.
So we would get the statement from 1 or 2, and then we would put it out to the public, to every other upfitter on our website, and then they could, you know, take their stab at that point if they want.
To make it, I'm going to jump in just to make this simpler. If anybody sells it, you have to do it. I don't really care which dealer you go with or which manufacturer you want. Right. So, but by rule, we say you go to 2 people that legitimately have these chassis available. And if they don't make it, you can turn in your request. But as soon as Daimler or somebody else says we can do it, we're going to reject the application.
Okay. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah. Because ideally, I mean, for my world or our view, it's like, sure, we would have loved you to go to the 12 manufacturers that might offer a vehicle and do it yourself. But we kind of found a middle ground and said, do due diligence with the first 2, but you know that if there's a third manufacturer or upfitter that does it, then we're not going to approve the extension and you would have to go to them. One thing I do want to also kind of say, because I just want to reiterate, is one of the things I kind of noticed in the phone calls and some of the things we're getting, a lot of people appear to be approaching the exemption request with, well, I have this rare vehicle, so let me have an exemption for this one, even though I can easily meet the requirement with all the other trucks. And that's not consistent with the rule. So by rule, you have to meet the requirements. The exemptions are there. It's like, hey, if you legitimately can't, because you're doing due diligence, we've try to match what you would normally do in the process. And then we specified here's the things to show where you legitimately can't comply. So just keep that in mind, because I think that's really, really important. So if you're a state and local government fleet and you're buying 10 trucks, if 5 of them are easy to buy as ZEVs, then you don't need to buy the others as ZEVs. You can buy diesel, gasoline, whatever. So if you're buying 5 specialized trucks in that example, and I'll just use 5 pickups. The pickups can be ZEVs. The other don't have to be ZEVs at all. There's no reason to come ask us for an exemption. Same thing with the 10% threshold and the milestone is if you meet the 10% because you have certain types that are relatively straightforward to electrify and you choose whichever ones you want to do, then there again, no real reason to be asking for an exemption. So it might be 27 or 2030, depending on how things play out. In that case, that it might be relevant, but it might not be relevant in the early years because the milestone option is targeting the box trucks and buses and what else? The yard trucks that are widely available as ZEVs right now, as an example.
Okay, Nick, you've had your hand up for quite some time. You've been very patient with us.
Not to worry. Good discussion all around. So I guess I really like Chris' idea of bringing public and private fleets together with manufacturers. I think that would be a good sub conversation. So I'm sure I can find members of my own within the public water space to help with that if there is a desire. And I think with the last few speakers, it brings me back to a thought. Would it be possible within the periodic updates to postings to note without identifying who requested the exemption or which manufacturers could not provide said requested vehicle, just maybe tally exemption requests received and the determinations, because that might be helpful from both the buyer's side, but then also data points for CARB of where those requests are coming in, and that information is then available to both sides of the equation for it.
Leave that to response from CARB. Jerry, do we have expectation to publish exemptions filed, approved, and generic descriptions thereof?
That's, yeah, we'll take a note of the best I could say is we'll need to talk about that internally and see what we can do. But I don't think we're required to do that, but we definitely are getting feedback here, and we'll talk about it and then we'll follow up.
We're gonna put that on the future discussion, Nick.
Well, and if I may, since I've been patient, I'll just throw out there another idea for future discussions. Following up last rule provisions and infrastructure workshop, there was a conversation on extensions for infrastructure delay, where it was unclear what the dynamics of a fleet requesting extension due to infrastructure. And then there being that on the CARB side, they could deny the request because it's multiple sites, and one site, in theory, could enable adoption of vehicles, whereas others where the fleet was trying to adopt vehicles could not. CARB would hold the ability to deny a request, and it didn't seem very fleshed out. So I would encourage that we revisit that conversation in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick. And it definitely is still on the radar for TRIG group and possibly another co-group meeting with rules and infrastructure. Definitely on the radar there.
Bradley, I know we have one more hand up, but
yes.
I just want to give a time check. We're at 15 minutes, so we do want to kind of talk about possible future topics as well. So
right into the segue. So I was going to say, Christian, let's get your question or comment, and then we're going to start talking about next steps and next sets of meetings.
Okay, I'll be quick. So I just wanted to say I really appreciate what Tony was saying and a lot of what CARB staff has said today about how, like, the way this regulation is set up is to ensure that we are pushing the ZEV market forward, and if trucks are available in certain configurations, like, they should be purchased and put into service. And CalIGC loves how the rule has been set up in that way. So for that example, say like 2 truck manufacturers say they can't build a certain truck, and then CARB takes it under review and finds that a 3rd manufacturer can. But let's say this fleet is located in Reading and the closest, like authorized service center is in Sacramento, or maybe even in Fresno or something like that, further away. Is CARB going to take into consideration like regional, locations of service centers and things like that? This is just kind of a, out of curiosity, just kind of wondering what the thinking is around that type of stuff. Because certainly if a truck can be purchased, so be it. But, there's other factors, right? So I'm kind of just wondering if that's.
Yeah, I mean, those topics were brought up during the rulemaking process, and we did address them in the FSOR, and ultimately did not make regulation changes to address manufacturer choice or service center locations, and the board approved the reg as is. So we're working within the parameters that are currently in the reg.
All right, then.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Christian. Moving on to discussions about next meeting and next steps. especially given the feedback that we had from the timeline of notifications. Again, I reiterated that the co-chairs are going to be a little bit more personal in the emails. You'll have an email coming from me or Rebecca or Jerry directly talking about this is the next steps, this is the next discussion items, here's the homework perhaps, and then here's the schedule. There was also a want or a request to talk about something that's a little bit more longer term plan of what meetings and what months and what days to be able to play out so that it's a little easier for scheduling. Throwing that out there as an idea, if that's something that everybody wants to entertain, as well as meeting cadency. Do we want to meet once every month, once every 2 months? There was a bit of a delay in between our first and second meeting, but again, we're also working through a lot of things in the first startup of these meetings. So we're getting we got our sea legs now. We're getting set. We just want to make sure that we're on here at the right amount of time moving forward for everybody. So let's hear from everybody, perhaps in the chat, and that way we can tally them up. And we don't take up too much time in the back and forth of what's your preferred. Is it monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly? Duration of time meetings. I think this 2-hour time frame is the right amount of time to be able to discuss and cover more than just one single subject or one subject that's large. But I think that's something that would be beneficial if we do keep this at a 2-hour cadence. So with everybody's comments in the chat, we'll have CARB staff kind of tracking that and making sure that we've got the tally at least of the preference for meeting cadency. There may or may not be revisions to that depending on CARB staff availability and as well as other items that would be coming in conflict. So just keep in mind, we're working through the schedule that we could absolutely work with and not overtask any of us all trying to keep this all running. Last but not least, I wanted to hear and have hands raised for next areas of discussion. We already heard about the TRIG infrastructure and the discussion there about the infrastructure rule and infrastructure exemptions. It sounds like from what we have here, we have a good basis of discussion for the ZEV purchase exemption list. And perhaps that for the next meeting, we're talking about that as a revision to then hash out, discuss, and say this is what we're looking for, and this is what can be expected for that list being maintained over the life. Dorothy, please chime in if I'm speaking out incorrectly on any of that expectation. And then moving forward as well with any of the other exemptions that we haven't touched on, what's the highest level of urgency right now. So happy to take hands and then open comment. We've got about 9 minutes left.
So Bradley, I just wanted to chime in before we open it up, is that again, remember that the forum for these TRIG meetings are to discuss the exemption, the rule provisions.
Right.
But there are plenty of opportunity to have, to ask questions on compliance assistance and the rule, the rule itself, the regulation itself through the Q&A sessions that we had. Like I said, we had 2 already this month. We had one on the reporting system. We've had one for focus on state and local governments. There's more coming here in the very, very near future. So keep an eye on the meetings and events calendar. So there's plenty of forums, as well as our ZEV fleet at arb.ca.gov. Plenty of opportunities, plenty of channels to get compliance assistance with the rule. We want to make sure that these meetings stay focused on the actual rule provisions and kind of think in terms of, this is an important one, but it might not take effect until a little bit later. Let's focus on the ones that are going to hit us sooner rather than later type of thing, as well as for the next steps.
Thanks, Jerry. All right, first hand up is John.
Hey, thanks. For future topics, I mean, we hit on it several times today, the whole operational side of things, right? So what do you do? So is that daily use, I guess, is something that I think everybody's got in the back of their mind. And I know there's a minimum ZEV requirement, so maybe it's not, as Jerry said, the at the very first thing, because people have to actually get ZEVs, but I think operational considerations are a big deal to folks, and we should start talking about it. That's my recommendation.
duly noted. Definitely on the list for the next meeting. Mileage exemption, or excuse me, daily usage exemption, and hashing out the intricacies to that. And hopefully we can get clarification on what's reasonably expected on both parties, right? On CARB and what fleets would be able to present and provide. Okay. No other hands up and no comments.
And Bradley,
okay.
for the public who aren't part of the panel and didn't get to, put stuff in the chat or ask questions, feel free to send in your comments, your questions, anything on this particular TRIG meeting to our zevfleet@arb.ca.gov email address. Just want to make sure that everyone does have a voice, so we want to make sure that those who are just listening in, if you didn't get a chance to participate here, send us your comments and your emails to zevfleet@arb.ca.gov.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're gonna get it. Oh, William, you got your hand up.
Yeah, just real quick on these sessions, is there any opportunity to kind of share data on, how this is shaping up in California, like number of exemption requests filed, type of exemptions, stuff like that, just to share data with the panel, CARB, and the public?
In relation to the rules and provisions, right?
Yes.
Of things that we're discussing and the things that are being processed. I think we did kind of touch a little bit on that. Jerry, you mentioned that we'll see what we can do, but maybe in the context of these meetings, we can just speak generally about statistics.
Yeah, CARB will have an internal discussion and we'll follow up on that one. Yeah, so.
Okay, thanks.
So have an update for next meeting. Okay. And then just for a poll for everybody here, and thought is and affirmative in the chat if you agree, is it beneficial and helpful to have a meeting summary of what items were discussed after these meetings that help to bring forward the full coverage, meeting summary type of thing that can help to bring forward and rehash a lot of the things that were discussed, so we keep on track and moving forward? Positive, yeah, okay, all right, yes. Lots of summary. Everybody wants the summary. I totally agree. I'd rather not have to re-attend a meeting recording again for 2 hours to get my head wrapped around everything. So awesome. All right, we'll get working on that, and we'll be able to pull a lot of that stuff together for the next meeting. CARB staff and the co-chairs are going to be pulling together this information, and thank you so much for everybody being able to contribute today. This is a very beneficial conversation, and looking forward to the next meetings being just as productive. So, Jerry, any final thoughts from CARB?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking time out of your day. I mean, like Bradley said, this is a spring break week, so it was a little bit, we had some more obstacles in the way, but I really appreciate the feedback, and hopefully we can continue the productive discussions going forward.
Awesome. All right. With that, we've got 4 minutes back of your days. Thank you, everybody, for your help and participation. Have a great Thursday, everybody.
Thank you all. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.